that's, in fact, where the connection is. The process that sits in the business layer of the architecture is the same process that we are concerned with in the BPM practice.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. Very excited to have you here for our next episode. If you are joining us for the first time, a warm welcome. We have a very large database of videos of episodes from Process Pioneers where we sit down with industry experts and practitioners in the field of business process management and other complementary fields as well. So there's a huge database there. And if you are coming back or joining us again, a long-time listener or a short-time listener, then welcome back to you as well. We'd really appreciate any ratings, reviews on any of the platforms that you listen to us on. It's going to help us continue to spread the message, spread the podcast series, and get this educational content out to more listeners, which is what we're all about. So in today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with MOBIN Barati. MOBIN Barati is a principal consultant at Modern Business Innovations. So very excited to sit down with MOBIN today. MOBIN, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
So we were having a bit of a chat before we got started today, MOBIN, and we're talking about this topic of enterprise architecture and business process management, how they work together, how they complement one another. And I think it's a big topic or a good topic for us to focus on, because I think there's a lot of different myths out there, a lot of people that have different thoughts around those two disciplines and how they do work together. Oftentimes, or at least in my experience, you'll talk to the enterprise architecture team and they're not really interested in the process space, and you'll talk to the process team and they're not so interested in the enterprise architecture space. I know that you have done a lot of work over the past few years in really bringing these two disciplines together in the various organizations that you've worked at. So can you, let's start there. How does enterprise architecture and BPM, how does it go together? How does it work together?
So I'll start with kind of giving a quick definition of these two different practices and then kind of make the connection towards the end of giving the definition. With enterprise architecture, one organization expects to understand the different moving parts of the enterprise, from the business layers or information layers or technology layers, applications and whatnot, and then creates an orchestration of these layers in order to support the enterprise or the organization's objectives. From BPM perspective, then it is a practice to kind of methodically and systematically supports the creation, development, enhancements of the business processes, again, to support the organization's objectives. So when you think about these two areas or these two disciplines and how they can integrate with each other, I think processes sit really well and nicely within the business layer of enterprise architecture. When you look at the different meta models in BPM, also architecture, enterprise architecture meta models, for example, TOGAF or Archimate or Zachman or any other, then you see the process appears in both meta models, and that's in fact where the connection is. The process that sits in the business layer of the architecture is the same process that we are concerned with in the BPM practice. So I think the connection between those two disciplines is very well established, and it is in fact the point that these two functions, if you, for example, put them into context of an organization, should see and should see that connection and how they can collaborate to work together. So I think that's from the definition how they relate. One other thing I want to add is most of the time the challenges come from I think this single thing. Process people, people who understands BPM, may not have the expertise in the technical space, in the technology space, how to create an application, how to configure an application, how to create a network, how to create secure a network, how to manage information, and that's where they may not have the experience. The architecture team, on the other side, may be really good at all of them except the process and the business layer in the architecture practice. In the business layer, you see the process and you see the products and services and the value streams and the organizations and the events and the controls. All of them are very much aligned with BPM, but then potentially the architecture team is more like a technical architecture team, not an enterprise architecture team. Therefore, from people want to come together and work on a topic, that shared knowledge or awareness may not be established between them. Hence, that could create some challenges for these functions to work together very closely.
Yeah. So it sounds like the organizational culture has a big impact on the effectiveness on bringing these two disciplines together.
Absolutely. I think the way that the organization expects different functions to perform and the sort of definition of what those functions are about plays a big role. For me, if I wanted to, for example, suggest a proper structure for an organization, I would look at how the organization would see those functions, what sort of definitions those functions might have from the lens of the key stakeholders. And then before proposing a structure, I would go and spend some time to create awareness and educate the stakeholders about the value of this integration and this connection. Once that understood and that appreciated, it makes it easier to propose a structure that is not two separate functions as such. It is the same function, but a sub-team or a sub-capability of that team would become responsible for the business layer of the architecture process at the center of that. And then whatever they identify, analyze, and improve, if some of the improvement ideas should be implemented through technology, then the integration of that function would enable the implementation of proper technology solutions to eventually enhance the business process. So that would be the approach that I've applied in a couple of clients that I work with. And I found it effective. Before, in fact, proposing the change, spend some time to educate and generate that understanding and awareness across the board.
Yes, yeah, and I'd imagine the education piece would be huge because you've got different people at different levels, different stakeholders that you need to engage in this journey. Now we've got a big audience listening to this that from different areas of an organization. We've got senior leaders, we've got people from the process team, process practitioners. We've probably got some enterprise architects listening as well. For those people that are part of, say, the process team, but there isn't so much of that sort of collaboration or cross-sharing of knowledge currently happening in their organization. Maybe it's two isolated sort of areas that don't have that relationship. How do you begin to form that bridge there? Is this something where you can only do it from the top down? You need to get a senior leader on board, or is this something that you can start building from the ground up?
I think, as always, it should be done at those two levels. So you need to get the senior leaders on board and kind of sponsor this approach. And then from the bottom up, then you need to educate the actual doers and people who are going to be engaged in this change or in this process. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you just get a direction from the top and you just execute. I've never seen that's been very successful. And then without the sponsorship, it is also very difficult to make effective changes. So I think both of those approaches at the same time should be applied. One thing I want to add, Daniel, is for example, when you're in an organization where you have a mix of capabilities. For example, you have your agile practitioners, you have the scrum masters who are really good in bringing people to the party and then prioritize based on the most important needs, and then kind of guide the team and support the team to deliver solutions in a timely manner. And then you have the developers or engineers who are really good in understanding the software development lifecycle. You have the testers, you have the analysts. Each one of these professionals bring a big value to the table. So then you have the process analysts, the process architects, that they are working on another subject matter and they're really good at it. So if you can kind of create that awareness of how each one of these disciplines and practices can help and support the other one, and then help people to understand if, for example, I have this information documented, though it might not be the top priority from Agile perspective to document many things, but then with a proper documentation of the solution, and then having all that information in a single repository, then you're actually enabling every other project to reuse that information, such information. And just to generate that awareness and help people to understand the value of these little things that they may need to do additionally, so it can help the other projects or the other practices, and it prevents a lot of rework. To kind of get to the same point. So I think that the time that you spend on bringing people together and help them to understand as a common understanding of how architecture practice and BPM practice can work together alongside other practices, agile practice and software development, engineering practices, and many of those. How all these work together, that's the time that are going to pay back, multiple folds.
Yes. And do you have a specific story that you can share with the audience of one of these light bulb moments where, maybe you've been bringing someone on this journey of how the two disciplines work together, and maybe it was someone that might have been skeptical beforehand, or they weren't quite sure how, like the value that it could bring. And then it sounds like at a number of the organizations where you've been bringing these two together, that I would imagine that there would have been some people that are like, oh, wow, MOBIN, I get it. Like, thank you for taking the time and thank you for your approach. I finally understand why this is so important that we build this bridge between these two disciplines, that they work hand in hand. Can you take us on a bit of a journey or tell a story about a particular example like that?
In fact, a few months ago, I received a message from one of the agile coaches of an organization I work with, kind of saying, I worked with many architects before in this organization and organization before this, and I've never worked with such approach. So he was supporting the approach I've applied, taking time to talk to people and bring them on board, and not to impose architecture governance processes and tools and methods on them without them being involved and engaged in the discussion to understand why all these things matter. So he was kind of praising with the way you've done it here. I can see the value. I was not sure if we ever needed an architecture practice in the organization. And now you've joined and done all this work. It sounds like you're going to go somewhere good with this, and you have my full support. So that was a good feedback, specifically from an area that I consider our most annoyed with architecture practice, if you like, because though you can prefix agile or BPM, BPM or architecture with agile, you can call it agile BPM, agile architecture. But if you want to kind of compare the speed of a squad solution delivery and the release cycle time with what architecture and BPM can offer, it slows it down. So it is not something that, at least in my experience, many agile practitioners are in favor of introducing slowness to their process. But having said that, when you explain why these parameters matter to be included into that process, and you create that awareness, then you potentially can achieve that outcome, that while the project is being delivered and while the squad or the team is creating solutions, but also they can generate enough documentation to support future projects and enable the architecture continue.
Yes, that's great, and I think that with the agile coach, there was obviously a journey you took him on to get that position. As you were saying, being able to communicate the why, communicate the value around why are we doing this. And I'd imagine that depending on who you're speaking with in the organization, depending on who you're trying to bring on this journey, you may be using different language that they're familiar with, language that makes sense to them, and maybe focusing the conversation around, well, what's going to move the needle in their world, because this is going to have an impact on them, but they're most interested about how it's going to impact their world, maybe not everything.
I think I was lucky with my education pathway. So I started as a software engineer. So I did a degree in software engineering. It's a long time back. But I kind of learned about the principles of software engineering. And then I moved to business analysis, and further I found myself very interested in business process management. So I did a degree in BPM at Queensland University of Technology. And right after that, I did another degree with enterprise systems with a major in enterprise architecture.
Right, okay.
So I think from the understanding of how these different disciplines are adding value to organizations, I studied and learned and practiced. But kind of in the back of my mind, I could connect these practices together to maximize the value that they can collectively bring to the organization. What is my observation is many organizations, they have these so many practices, but they are separate. And the objectives, though, might be aligned on paper. In practice, they have still some edges that they do not align. And that is actually the potential for further alignment, reduce the rework, reduce the waste in those processes, and kind of enhance the collective value that all of these practices and disciplines can offer to an organization.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it just shows the importance of being able to grow these practices together, sort of hand in hand from the beginning. I'd imagine that if an organization has a very mature process practice, as an example, or enterprise architecture practice, introducing one of the other, like the process side or the enterprise architecture side, I would imagine it would always kind of be at the mercy of whatever's already been established in the other practice. Would you say?
Yeah, I agree. So usually, architecture practices are quite established in large enterprises. Kind of intermediate size organizations are kind of getting to that space now. They've seen the value, but in very large organizations, you've seen architecture/analysis capabilities are well established. They have many years of experience. Some, they have all the 4 layers. Majority, they have the technical layers covered. And then when BPM is introduced to the mix, it's relatively newer, younger in that space, and has to kind of fight to find its own space.
Right.
So it's not ideal to not have that functional definition properly done from the beginning. So then people from different disciplines don't have to go to a fight or to a disagreement for their authority and what it is that they're responsible for. So it is an opportunity actually here to, before making those alignments on paper, help the relevant parties, the relevant stakeholders to understand the value, and then define those functions in a way that they work together, not against each other. One simple thing I can think of is many of the BPM teams, they're focused on process improvement projects. And not many of them are focused on the continuity of BPM as a practice to manage the process. It's more a process improvement team function. Either way, they identify opportunities that are only can be realized by implementing or changing technology. Right. And with the integration of BPM and architecture practices in a right way, you maximize the opportunity to kind of hook the output of the BPM practice to the input of the architecture practice without friction.
Yes.
And that would be very ideal for an organization to identify opportunities and they can respond to them quickly.
Yes.
So they can kind of close the gaps at all fronts, being the process itself or the knowledge around the process or the technology that supports the process. So it would be very, very effective approach in my estimation.
Right. And finally, obviously today we've been able to dive into this EA BPM topic, and I'm sure that you've certainly piqued the interest of some of the audience that has been listening. So I guess for those that are wanting to, I guess, make this bridge between these two disciplines, maybe they're sitting in one camp or the other camp, or they're currently trying to bring it together. What's the first step? I guess those that maybe haven't started that journey yet, what's the first step that they should do today, tomorrow, to begin this journey?
Thankfully, with YouTube, podcasts, so many ebooks that are freely available, and of course, ebooks that are not too expensive, there is an opportunity to read and learn about these concepts and topics and disciplines. I myself have spent quite some time with a long playlist of items to watch on YouTube, and I continuously update myself with whatever these disciplines and the practitioners of these disciplines offer to the community. It's a free university. And I just, for example, this podcast, when I listen to it on a regular basis, every time we release, I listen and I kind of learn a new thing, because that comes from a place of practice, that comes from a place of someone has put time and effort to get something done, and they've learned something from it so they can share. So for me, it's just spending half an hour, 20 minutes or 45 minutes listening to a podcast while I'm driving or, I'm cooking. So it is an opportunity for me also to learn something without actually going through the pain. There's so many opportunities. Also, there are practitioners are available to provide that guidance. If anyone is interested, I'm available on LinkedIn. Send me a message, and I'm more than happy to have a chat and help.
Fantastic. No, I love that, Mobin. I think being able to learn from those that have already been there and done that, being able to reach out to someone like yourself on LinkedIn and ask you questions. Obviously, we're only really able to scrape the surface on this topic in the time that we've had, but I'm sure that those that are interested in exploring this topic further, they may have more questions coming up that they'll want to reach out and connect with you on. So, but I just want to thank you for sitting down with me. I've certainly gleaned a lot from you today myself, and I'm sure the audience has as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining me.
All pleasure of mine. Thanks, Daniel.